everybody. How are you? I'm so glad to be here today. Actually, it has been an overwhelming couple of weeks ever since Key Leadership began to advertise this session. I have received so many contacts through email. My LinkedIn box is filled up, and I am just overwhelmed by how much enthusiasm there is for our session today. Couple of things I want to let you know. The first is I am so complimented by all the wonderful notes and the lovely things you said about the classes you've had with me before. So I know a lot of you already have had plain language training. Today, though, is going to be a little different indeed. I was here last year teaching basic plain language principles, and I was asked to come back and do a deeper dive. So I want to focus on the very foundation of plain language. Let me start again. Hello, everyone. I'm here. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm Wendy Wagner-Smith. I'm thrilled to be here. I want to thank you for all the emails and messages I've received in the past 2 weeks. There's so much excitement and enthusiasm about writing clearly. I hope you are in a place where the sun is shining today. We had a terrible, dark, rainy day yesterday, and it started out badly this morning, but it has passed, and we can write clearly now. The rain is gone. We're going to look at plain language a little bit differently today. We're going to look at audience and plain language. We're going to look at 3 basic types of audience and targeting a clear message, effective communication with any audience, and how to write clearly for every audience pretty much instantly. But I need to caution you all, even though I receive so many expressions of excitement about learning plain language, guys, this is not actually a basics class. This is a deeper dive into one aspect of plain language. But I'm aware that so many people are here for plain language. So let's review. First, let's talk about what plain language is. Plain language is simply communication that your audience can understand the first time they hear or read it. Notice audience is highlighted. That's a foundational principle. And the audience has to be able to find what they need, understand what they find, and use the information to meet their needs or do what we as government has asked them to do or to comply. So we're going to do just a super, super fast run through of the basic principles of plain language. And then I'm going to ease you into looking at all of the aspects of audience. So first, let's look at how we design our message. We're going to organize for easy reading and make sure that everything is easy to skim and the document is very intuitive to navigate. Remember, white space is everyone's friend. White space tells your eye where to go and makes it possible for you to go through the weeds to know exactly what you're looking for next and find what you're looking for. It's crucial to have graphics, charts, visuals to support and amplify that message. And really, it's a dirty secret, but we all have to eventually come to terms with it. Graphics can sometimes be more important than words. Research actually shows that readers will spend more time on a graphic or a visual than the actual words sometimes. So you can't afford to go text only these days.
Mm-hmm. And see, that's probably something more that Jeremy needs to hear.
Hi, Wendy, you're muted again.
Rather than us discussing that amongst ourselves, although, I mean, I think he sees it, but
I'm so sorry. I don't know how that's happening, that I'm becoming muted, but please stick with me. Okay, we're going to use stacked tables and lists to break up all of those long sentences. And we're going to use that to make complicated situations much easier to take in. And that includes lots of headings and subheadings. Again, white space is everyone's friend. The real important thing about headings and subheadings, I want to make sure everybody's aware of, is that headings and subheadings actually relieve you as the writer from having to write extra to transition between sections or paragraphs. So use those headings and subheadings effectively and often. And whenever possible, use question headings. Question headings make what you're writing relevant to the audience. You capture the voice that's in their head, especially if they've come to your document with a question. How do I do this? Where do I send this? Those are really important headings that will help people understand what you've written. But the real important stuff here today is, how are we writing clearly? And the first, most foundational principle of plain language is to write clearly for your audience. So we're going to drill down into that in depth today. Choose simpler, clearer words to enhance understanding. We're going to drill into that a little bit today, and I'm going to give you a tool to help you, a little way to hack your writing. Eliminate jargon and bureaucratese. You're going to come to hear me talk a lot about how bureaucratese and jargon are really siblings, and we want to get them out of the picture. I think perhaps I'm having a little trouble mousing today. I'm in a wrist brace, so please bear with me. And we're going to use pronouns for relevance. We, the agency, work for you, the citizen, and we're going to try to make sure that is clear. Write in active voice. I know people really struggle with this. I have a whole class on nothing but how to understand and write in active voice. But basically, it comes down to this: subject, verb, object, which is the basic form of sentences in our English language. Once you flip that on its head into passive voice and the verb comes before the subject, now the reader needs help to make sense of it and to understand it. And we're going to work today and every day on freeing the hidden verbs from the shackles of clutter that we tend to hide them in. So I'm going to ask you to stop imprisoning these clear action verbs into cluttery phrases, and we're going to look at that a little bit today too. Write short, clear sentences. Clear sentences. Target, aim for 20 words. If you go beyond 33 words, stop digging, get out of the hole. It's now time to look at what's gone wrong and engage your plain language techniques to cut out all the extra and make it clear and simple. And remember, clear sentences build clear paragraphs. So we're going to look at our paragraphs in terms of how much stuff a paragraph makes on the page or the visual field we're looking at. Limit your paragraphs to one thought or topic and try to keep them short enough that they only take up 5 to 7 lines deep on a standard page. That's usually going to work out to about 2 or 3 sentences max. If your paragraphs are half a page deep, something's gone terribly, terribly wrong. And remember, one sentence paragraphs are fine, because if we're limiting our paragraphs to a thought and you have a thought that's different than the thought that came before or after it, why add an extra sentence just to meet an arbitrary rule that was formed in the early 1900s by a grammarian who had some particular little pet peeves? So here we go into today's most important topic: audience and plain language. Okay, so this is from plainlanguage.gov, and I'm going to start there because plainlanguage.gov is your best resource for all things plain language. I want to encourage you, whether you are a federal government employee or not, to make just frequent use of that resource. On our audience page, plainlanguage.gov, gives us this little thought that it's a myth that you have to dumb down your content so everybody can read or understand it. And I want to amplify that. It is an absolute myth. Plain language is never about dumbing down. Plain language is always about clarity. So from plainlanguage.gov, here we go. The first principle of plain language is write for your audience. Use language your audience understands and feels comfortable with. Take their level of expertise and knowledge into account and keep the knowledge and expertise and interest of that reader in mind. Don't write for managers, don't write for lawyers or technical experts unless they are the primary audience. Instead, do the research and learn who your audience really is. That's what we're going to talk about today. And most importantly, test your assumptions. Test what you think you know about your audience, because the great George Bernard Shaw taught us that the biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. That means a lot of times we think we're communicating, but we're actually not. So it's really important to look at audience and plain language, because not only is it the foundational principle of plain language, but it's just a crucial element in your strategic communications planning and in creating an effective plain language culture. Here's what often happens in federal agencies. I'm in my fourth federal agency now, and so this is somewhat anecdotal, but I want to tell you, when I have data today, you're going to get actual data. When I have a story, I'm going to invite you to think about how that relates in your own work and your own life. If you've been in a federal agency for any length of time in communications, you probably have noticed that agencies tend to actually overestimate who their audience is and the level of expertise. Now, that happens for a number of reasons. We're going to talk about a few of them today. But what is really clear for me, after having done this for more than 15 years, is that clarity improves when everybody from the top all the way down is clear about who exactly we're writing for. When you have silos and managers in different silos all think that we're doing something different or talking to someone different, or if you have senior management that thinks the audience and the way we should interact and send messaging to the audience is different than the people who are actually performing the mission work, you're always going to have a problem. And in the fall, when the Center for Plain Language Studies comes to study your website, to see how your agency ranks on the annual report card, you may not be happy with those results. So the best analysis of data, of audience, is always based in data. But if you're in a small agency where there's just no way you're ever going to be able to put out a big contract, don't worry. You don't have to hire a big data crunching firm to help you with this. We all have a number of tools at our disposal we can begin using right away. And I want you to be encouraged today that you too can go back to your desk and know exactly who your audience is with just a little bit of teamwork. So first, think about this. Your web team can tell you a tremendous amount about where your audience comes from by the location of the URL. They can tell you whether you have a lot or a little government audience. If you're having a lot of people from think tanks, they can tell you if students are joining in. They can tell you if your target audience is actually accessing the documents, because they have all that data. Now, they may not be able to get it out for you quickly or easily. It might be a process, but I want to encourage you to start. And remember, your Outlook email system also has got a tremendous amount of information. Your IT office should be able to tell you a lot about which emails were opened and what communications were landed. And don't forget, your web team can tell you not only who comes to your document, but how long they stay. How long they stay tells you whether or not they're actually reading and taking in your message. So let's look at what is audience. Exactly what are we talking about? So we're going to talk about audience in a couple of different ways today. First, the audience is a collection of people taking in your message somehow. Written, visual, audio, and I see you out there, podcast lovers. You would be surprised at how many people are getting 100% of all their information through podcasts and social media these days. A general audience just means everyone. That's every possible person in the greater audience that your agency might be communicating for. And a specific audience is just a subset of that general audience. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to look at this through a framework that I've formulated over these years. Many of you know that I was out of government for a couple of years. I went through a RIF, and so I went out on my own for a while. And I was actually hired by a state government department to come and train their entire staff on plain language during that time. And they asked me to train everybody in the basics and to help them with a couple of other more intense problems at the same time. So over the course of 3 days, we really dug in deep. One of the things that particular organization was struggling with was audience. And so I built this to help them understand what they needed to do to understand their own audience. And here is my framework. You're going to find when you go out and begin doing your own research, there are a lot of different ways that audience is researched and analyzed these days. This is the framework I've built because I think it's really an effective way to understand what we do in government, particularly at the federal level. So I'm going to talk about primary and secondary audiences and watchdog audiences as a whole separate category. And I'm going to use words like primary and target and intended pretty much interchangeably or synonymously because the distinctions are so very fine, and it's hard always to stop and go, oh, by target, I really mean primary. So I just want you to know what language I'm using today. Again, because clarity, clarity, clarity. So let's start and take a look at primary audience. The primary audience, the intended audience, the target audience, whichever label we want to use at any moment, is the group of people for whom we actually created the product or designed the message or wrote the document or created the report or answered the questions, whatever it is. Those are the people we think we're writing for. But the primary audience might be a little different than the important audience or the most important. The most important audience has the ability and perhaps the power to affect your agency mission, maybe positively, which is always good, and maybe negatively, which is why analysis is so crucial. So remember, government agencies tend to maybe overestimate their audience levels of expertise some. And in general, this is not a blanket rule, this is just in general, government agencies tend to have the framework of we have an internal audience and an external audience. So think about that. If you're in a small to medium-sized agency, you probably have a department that's either called External Affairs or Communications and External Affairs, Congressional Affairs and External Affairs, and you probably have 1 or 2 employees who are devoted to internal communications inside that department. Now, of course, your department might be called something entirely different, but a lot of government agencies tend to look at inside and outside. Now, obviously, today we're focusing on external audiences, not internal, with one exception that we'll talk about in just a few minutes. But keep in mind that every general audience, it doesn't matter if it's inside or outside, is going to have a lot of different subsets within that greater audience. Now, there's a huge school of thought in the world of marketing out in the private sector that no organization can ever be completely adequate, completely effective if they're trying to create content for multiple audiences. The contention is you'll end up with confusing websites and other products. People won't really know where to go or what to look for. You'll confuse your message. You'll lose customers. But every agency is writing for more than one audience. And our challenge is that we've got to figure out how to be clear for all of them, at least all of the important ones. So every agency can benefit from analyzing audience through the lens of that word I used earlier, mission. So I'm going to use this word mission, and you're going to think to yourself, my goodness, she's telling us not to use bureaucratic language in using mission. And I'm doing that because it's a word we hear every day in our work. And what it really means is the work that we do as an agency. So we're going to think about our mission in terms of our daily work, our daily products, all the things we're trying to get done in too short a time with too few resources. That's our mission today. And we're going to look at audience in terms of that mission. And sometimes that means that depending on what kind of agency we're in and what our mission is, that we're trying to get the audience to do something, which means we need persuasive, clear language, and we need to motivate that audience. But more often, what we're trying to do is deliver information in the service of our mission, because all of those audience members have specific questions about our agency and the mission. What are we doing? And so those products are going to be our news releases, our reports, the citizens services that we provide for those people who come to us with questions and a need. Now, if we have a primary audience, we have a secondary audience. And I want to talk about that in terms of thinking about the star of the movie and the supporting cast, because that's how we figure out exactly who we're writing for. Let's go back to that question of importance. Remember, the most important audiences are the audiences, and they may be subsets of audience, who have the potential to somehow affect either positively or negatively your agency's mission. That does not mean there are unimportant audiences. All audiences are important. But if you remember Animal Farm from George Orwell, remember, some pigs are more important than others. Some audiences are more important. And the question is why? And which ones are crucial to mission? Which ones have the effect, the power to affect what we do every day? And it's important to know that an agency can have more than one primary audience. And in that case, it has to be very precisely defined and really clear who we're writing for. And we'll talk about that in a little more depth in just a bit. We expect the primary audience to be the first people to get our message and to have some sort of power to act on the message. But that's often not true. Agencies often don't take into account that sometimes a secondary audience may actually be the first to receive and act on our message or our document. The primary audience might sometimes be the least likely to get your message first. And sadly, sometimes the target audience, the people you intend to reach, can sometimes be the least interested. You will know from the data you can gather. So let's stop for just a moment. Take a minute here, because we're moving at a goodly fast pace. your entire department has spent weeks trying to gather all the information, going through all the approvals to write down that information for questions for the record, the dreaded QFRs that have come from a congressional committee. So here's the exercise. Please put your answers in the chat, and my wonderful wizards behind the curtain are going to let me know what you're thinking. Who is the intended audience in this case? So get typing, guys. Who is the actual audience in this case? Who do you think is going to be the first audience to read the response you have sent to Capitol Hill? Who's going to be the most important audience to read your response when it gets to Capitol Hill? So type in the chat. I'm going to get my wizards to call out some responses, and then give me a percentage from 10% to 100%, just for fun. How likely is it that the elected representatives on that committee are ever actually going to read your message themselves? So just take just a few seconds typing in the chat. And Lamont and Nate, if you start seeing some good answers, if you would jump in and let me know, that would be fantastic.
Of course, Wendy. We're getting a lot of comments on congressional staff. We also have, and just folks, make sure to clarify which audience as well. But for intended audience, we see congressmen, Congress, actual would be public. A lot of we have an aide, we have congressmen, actual congressional staff. So lots of congressional staff here, Hill staffers. And in terms of percentage, we're getting a whole range from 1%, less than 3%, 0%, all the way to, I'm seeing 10. I think 10 is the highest. Yes.
10 is the highest. Oh, you guys are going to be my favorite class today. Thank you. That is fantastic response. And every single one of those answers is most likely correct, because you're exactly right. In this case, we wrote our answers to Congress because they asked the questions. They are the audience, but the likelihood that our intended primary target audience is going to actually read that message is very low, maybe less than 10%, because staffers are going to read that message, and those staffers are going to interpret and summarize whatever you think you said. Now, if your answers have been unclear, and they didn't understand whether you actually answered the question, this can lead to a series of unfortunate events. Most often, it's going to mean somebody's going to the Hill to either talk to the staff along with the members in a closed door meeting, or they may be shining up for their television appearance in an actual testimony meeting, an actual hearing. So understanding not just who your primary audience is, but also the secondary audiences and the roles they play, and the import of that secondary audience that you might have just brushed off, or perhaps maybe even managers have not taken into account. Congressional staffers are incredibly powerful in this way, because they are interpreting your message for the legislators. You must make sure that that message is perfectly clear and has answered whatever question was asked. You guys got this. You know it. So secondary audiences is everybody outside the primary. And remember, the general audience is the entire group. In this way, that the congressional staffer is more important than that congressman for that particular message, understand that a lot of secondary audiences can affect your mission. They can have influence on an outcome because they may be the interpreters. They may be asked, as the Congress people have asked the staffers, to be the interpreters, or they may take on that role themselves. And then the third type of audience we're going to look at today in this framework, again, remember, there are just lots and lots and lots of resources out there about how audiences are analyzed. And some of the things that I'm going to refer to today as audience characteristics in other pieces of research and teachings would be called audience types. Now, we're looking at three types: primary, the people we think we're writing for; secondary, everybody else; and the but is the third type, watchdog audiences. Watchdog audiences have political, social, economic interest in your agency. They are everywhere. Every agency has watchdogs, whether they're aware of it or not. I had a student tell me that their agency did not have watchdogs because they had never been directly contacted by anyone to complain. And I thought that was kind of missing what a watchdog was. Watchdogs have tremendous influence. They may or may not be interested in interacting with your agency directly. Influence means power to affect how your agency is operating. That's agency mission. And watchdogs are hypervigilant, hypersensitive. They are looking at every document your agency publishes. They're looking for any shred of evidence that supports their point of view or what they're looking for in your agency's documents. So I want you to leave with this today. Watchdogs bite. Always remember watchdogs bite. But who are the watchdogs? So I'm going to propose to you today that one of the most, if not the most powerful watchdog that all agencies have these days, social media. In the past 5 to 8 years, powerful, perhaps the most powerful influencer of government. Now, 5 years or 8 years? Some sources say 5, that the power of social media really peaked out with the 2016 national election. Other sources say 8, that the changes that Facebook and Instagram made as early as 2012 and 2013 gave social media the impetus to explode as not only an audience of people who were just having fun, but audiences of influencers turning their attention to government. Social media, we all know this. Anyone who's ever worked in an agency where something blew up on social media, you'll never forget that lesson. Social media amplifies and distorts. If your message is already unclear and it's going to be distorted, imagine what's going to happen to that final message. And that's what leads to misunderstanding. It's what leads to viral spread or the blow-ups. And remember, we all think of social media as, something fun, a lot of cat videos. Remember the days when social media was 100% about sharing that beautiful, beautiful picture of that incredible meal you had at the gourmet restaurant at your anniversary dinner. And that was it. That was the power of social media. We all knew what everybody was having for dinner. But social media is way more than just the media of the people having fun these days. It is the media of watchdogs, corporate interests, special interests, and it is incredibly powerful. Your social media needs to be clearer than ever. That audience needs to understand without question. Other powerful watchdogs. The good old media, the national, local, and other news media. I spent 15 years in that world. So I have a perspective about media having come from that world that helps inform what I do in my job as a government communicator. Now, here's a question for you. Again, jump in that chat, friends. I want to hear what happens when the media publishes a story about a document that misrepresents the message that the agency thought they put out. So we're going to say either an incorrect, actually inaccurate interpretation, or something that context is off. The facts are right, but the context is off so much that it seems like it's a different message. So please jump in. And wizards, I need you to tell me again what people are thinking.
Hi, Wendy. We'll give folks a couple more minutes, but Victoria said we'll get an OIG investigation.
Yes, Victoria, I work in an OIG right now, and you're exactly right. What else will happen?
We're getting congressional inquiries, requests for investigations, conspiracy theories.
Oh, yes.
Folks complaining about stuff that didn't happen, and sometimes largely nothing. Definitely miscommunication, confusion, reputation crisis, and misunderstanding. The crux of it is confusion.
Wonderful. Again, you guys are my favorite class today. You're exactly right. Every single one of those answers is 1,000% correct, even the largely nothing. So let's talk about overblown concern about news stories. Believe me, I get it. You're exactly right. Often, not much will happen. Maybe the boss will be a little upset today, but there's another story tomorrow. He'll forget about it and be upset about that one tomorrow. That really is truly the usual course of events. But what about that special day, that special story? Now, once I had an experience where, because I covered government for 15 years in the daily newspaper world, a very high-level state government official, a governor of a state, challenged me on a story. I had written a story about a report that had been put out by the governor's office of Virginia, and I had interviewed the governor and other people, and I had written the story. It was solid, it was correct, but they absolutely lost their composure because they thought they were persuading me to write one story. But I knew all of my competitors in that market would write that story, and so would all of the television stations. That story would be everywhere. And I needed to find the gold nuggets that were hidden. And I found one. I found one that ended up immediately on the front page above the fold, if you know what that means. You know, it became a lead story. And so there were a lot of gubernatorial staff folks who were incredibly upset that I dug that piece of information out and amplified it. It led to a number of things. It led to changes. It led to a state budget change. So in that way, just because I was looking to keep my boss happy, I inadvertently caused a financial effect. A lot of things can happen. If a story comes out about a report you've published, and I've been working in government reports for nearly 16 years now, 18 if you count the 2 years I was out on my own working in that. If you put a government report out and you really want people to see the main point, then the main point has got to really be clear. It's got to be right up front, and it's got to be repeated often all the way through, because otherwise, you know, somebody's going to reinterpret that for you, and it may mean nothing, or it may mean your director's getting a call from the IG's office, or it may mean your director or some other high-level management official in your agency is getting an invitation to come and chat on the Hill. These are things that affect mission. If you've been in a situation ever once in your entire government life when something came from the Hill and Everything stopped. The whole agency had to mobilize to answer those questions, to write that testimony, to coach that director, to get those binders together. Everything stops. That is power. That is an effect on the mission. And so we want to make sure, not just with Congress, but with all those audiences and subsets, that we're doing everything we can to be clear, because we understand that they affect mission, but mission effect often causes heartburn. And here's why. A lot of federal leaders are very anxious and resentful about this question of writing for the media or writing to social media or whatever. I heard people say, I don't care what the reporters think. And that is totally valid. Federal leaders have to be focused on their mission, but they also do have to be caring what the reporters and the social media and the other watchdogs think. Realize you are never not writing for the media if you have documents on a public website. Every media, either the main media, the national media, in many situations, we have agencies who are watched intensely by global media all over. I did a stint in the public affairs office for the Treasury Department during a presidential transition, and I was specifically assigned to help global media with all their questions. You're always writing for media if something goes on a public website. Now, there's an exception to that we're going to talk about when we get to our discussion of experts in just a little while. But understand, clarity is the answer. And no matter what the question is, my answer is always going to be plain language can fix that. Plain language is flexible and adaptive, and plain language is devoted to clear communication for the audience. When there is an unclear message, the audience now has the agency now has a risk factor to deal with. And so a lot of what we're talking about in building a plain language culture is also involved in our risk management in agencies, because maybe nothing happens when the story comes out. Maybe everything happens. Maybe it changes our agency budget for the next fiscal year. Maybe we're looking at weeks of unpleasant coverage. Maybe we're looking at being called to the Hill. Maybe we're looking at getting more budget because of what's going on. In my agency, that's what happened. When products are unclear, you've got to control that message. If you cannot control it, you're at high risk. The media and all the other watchdogs, as well as some secondary audiences like those congressional staffers, they will be more than happy to assume the task of interpreting your message for you. It's what they exist for. So the answer is always plain language, folks. Reduce your risk by ensuring that the documents are clear for that audience, for that target audience. Use plain language. You need to satisfy the understanding needs and answer the questions of all the audiences. So for many years, through the Plain Language Action and Information Network of the federal government, we taught something called the 90-10 rule. Focus on 90% of your target audience and what they need to know and answering their questions, but meet the understanding needs of the other 10%, which is all the other audiences. I now tend to think that our primary audience is usually a much smaller percentage of that greater general audience, but 90-10 rule still works the same. We're going to focus our message on our intended audience, but we're going to meet the needs of all the others, and I'm going to teach you how to do that today. Other watchdogs you must be very aware of and understand. Lawyers, yes. What if your document or your product ends up in a court case, either for or against your agency? If you've never had the pleasure of being deposed when an agency is being sued, I want to invite you to avoid that with all your heart. It's not good. In my very first federal job, agency was sued, and I got to go downtown and be deposed at the courthouse because I was the lucky editor who drew the short straw on that report. Believe me, lawyers are incredible watchdogs. They may not be your everyday watchdogs, but should there ever be a legal question, oh my stars, they will comb through every single stroke anyone in the agency ever typed for the purposes of their case. So be aware that you need to always be thinking. And also, I want to encourage everybody to show a little love to your Office of General Counsel in your agency, your OGC. They can help you with a lot of things that could be problems later. Political and economic lobbies. If you are in the DC area, as I am, you are very well of what K Street means. K Street here happens to be where all these office buildings that a lot of big lobbying firms are housed in. And so that's sort of insider lingo. The K Street crowd are the political and economic lobbies. They are incredibly influential, and influence is power. Their influence is that they want to amplify or validate your message for their own purposes. They are trying to get laws passed for whomever they represent. And they have financial resources. Lobbyists are happy to throw money around. Those are powerful watchdogs. They are looking for a way to advance their own interest, and they have money. That means they can affect the legislative branch, and the legislative branch affects all of us. Think tanks, which are private research institutions. If you've ever heard of the Brookings Institution, the Cato Institute, there are literally thousands of them. They are not looking at your agency in the same way that the lobbyists are, although they also are looking to either validate or dispute your message. They are studying for academic or business or social interests. So they want to know whether or not the agency has correct and accurate data on a particular topic of interest to that institution. They also have tremendous influence on the legislative branch because they have educational and expert credibility. Think for a moment how many people are in very high leadership positions that are really, very, very much out there in the media, in think tanks, who used to be cabinet secretaries or other high-level political appointees. These are folks who are tied in to the system. They have resources. They know a lot of people. They have influence individually, and their institutions have influence and credibility. They have the power not only to propose legislation in the way that lobbyists do, to advocate for it in the way that lobbyists do, but they also have the power to be asked to write legislation. That means they could have a tremendous effect on your agency. They could change your mission. Okay, so now before we begin to talk about subtypes and characteristics, now that we've finished our primary, secondary, and watchdog audience types, we're going to take a break. But I want to let you know, I'm going to be here on the line, available to answer any questions or chat if you'd like to. So if you'd like to hang around and talk or ask questions or whatever, I will be here for you for the next 10 minutes. Otherwise, if you want to take a break, please stretch. Please do something rhythmic to get your blood moving, and get a drink and come back for the second half. right at 2:00. It's 10 till. We're going to stop there and we will begin again at 2. Meanwhile, I'm on the line for you, and my wizards are going to let you know about anything you need to know now. So, Laman and Nate, please let everybody know what they need to know.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Yes, we will be on standby for any tech issues, challenges that you might have. Please feel free to unmute yourself to direct your question to Wendy, but we'll be here on the line in the background and we'll get right started at 2 p.m. Just a quick note, thank you so much, Wendy, for being here and having and sharing your wonderful expertise and wisdom with us. We'll be in the background.
Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing the presentation and just hang here. So if you'd like to unmute or come on camera, that'd be great. If you want to communicate through chat while we have our little break time, that's awesome too. And I will actually open up the chat because I also want to kind of take a look at all your fantastic answers to our questions earlier. Okay, wow, these are fantastic. The press. Is the press considered a watchdog audience? Absolutely. The press, the media, I use that as a kind of synonym. You're welcome, Kim. You're so welcome. This is so important, and it's one of the things that I find causes so much confusion and upset about the concept of plain language. How many times in the past 20 years has someone told me that plain language was dumbing down? I can't even count anymore. I even have a colleague in my agency who is absolutely obsessed with the concern about dumbing down. But he's a tech expert, and I totally understand where he's coming from. We're going to talk about that in depth today. But yeah, the question of audience is crucial to understanding how to not only write in plain language, but how to structure your entire communications program and your culture in your agency to be a clarity culture where we're all always being as clear as we can. Anybody else want to add anything?
Hello, Wendy.
Yes.
Hi, this is Mark Walden, FAA. Thanks so much for leading this class. One of the questions I had is really relevant for us, especially in the FAA. Are you going to be touching on voice? Meaning, when you're actually physically writing, are you in the passive voice, the first person, the third? How are you looking at the audience and considering voice, depending on what you're trying to communicate? So if you're going to be touching on that later, great, just something that would be interesting to us.
Absolutely. Let me jump on that right now, Mark. So primarily, the only thing we're going to talk about voice in terms of this class, we've already done with our plain language review, but I want to answer your question. Okay. So the word voice, I think you might mean tone. Passive, the word voice as an active voice or passive voice means verb. In olden times, back in the Renaissance times, when grammar was first being invented in our language, when we first began to look at how our language works after the transition from Latin into speaking English, the word verb didn't exist. They used the word voice. So active verb or passive verb is what that means. However, the concept of voice meaning tone, what is the voice of the narrator writing the narrative is a little bit different. So in active voice, the doer of the action always comes before the verb, always comes before the verb. And that's why I showed you subject, verb, object. So you want to be an active voice, and in that structure, subject is not only the subject of the sentence, as in subject and predicate of the sentence, It is the subject of the action, the doer of the action. Passive voice means the doer of the action has been put behind the verb. And because of the way our language is structured, that means that we're actually able to not have the doer of the action in many sentences. Mistakes were made. We're not saying who made the mistakes, how that happened, anything. We're just saying we acknowledge mistakes were made. So that's a passive voice construction that allows us not to name the doer of the action, because we're just going to drop that prepositional phrase off the end. Mistakes were made by who? The president, by the White House, by the people who sold the product, whatever. Mistakes were made. We're able to do that. Voice in terms of tone, the voice of the narrator is a little bit different. And so what I teach and try to convey is that plain language asks us to have a professionally conversational tone. That means we don't have to descend into the realms of slang and using emojis and social media abbreviations. But by that same token, we should not be using this highfalutin bureaucratic jargony language either. We want to be professionally conversational. It makes things relevant for readers. And that's why we want to talk in terms of we, the agency. So we use pronouns and talk about what we did, what we found, what we learned, what we investigated. And we talk to you, the recipient of the communication. You are the citizen, the stakeholder, whatever. Depending on the word choice, using pronouns and the jargon and the bureaucratic language, which we're going to devote most of the second half of our class to, that would be a different kind of voice. I hope I'm hitting it. So can you come back on mic and tell me if I've gotten anywhere close to it?
You've gotten very close to it, and I really appreciate that. So, I'm looking at from a framework and a lens of not just how we're responding to FOIAs and OIG, because that certainly, I think we have the professionalism, but it's really more about, as you've characterized it, the tone. So what tone are you trying to inflect in that? Especially, if I'm writing a budget request submission, right?
Yes.
To OMB.
Oh, yes. Very mission affecting, right?
Right. And the tone has to be very clear on what you expect that you need the money for, the justification for it, and how it will be used to benefit who. Right. So
absolutely.
Thank you for that.
Absolutely. I want to give you another tip, and then we're going to come back from break so that we're sure we have time to get everything correct. And I really want to have a lot of time to interact and answer questions today. So, pro tip, you have one of the most amazing plain language professionals in the federal government in the FAA. I want you to look on your directory and find Shannon Salinsky. Salinsky. Shannon.
I know Shannon. Yeah, I know Shannon, her, Greg Carter, Nathan Tash. So I work for Nathan and Greg. So that's why we thought this would be a great thing, maybe to pick up some additional tips. But
absolutely. So Shannon is your best source to get that clarity on how to do the mechanics of voice. And cold readers are your best resource for the tone issue, okay? And what I would do is I would ask a cold reader to read the item out loud. I'd just go grab somebody down the hall who had nothing to do with that project and say, would you do me a favor and just read this out loud to me? Any missteps of tone that sound snarky, sarcastic, demanding, ugly in any way will come through when you switch to the mode of listening rather the mode of thinking through the words. But you want to hear it read by someone who doesn't know anything about it. Okay, now we're back from break. We had a couple of wonderful questions and comments while you were gone. I'm so excited. I'm going to wait 30 more seconds to give folks a chance to really get keyed back in and adjusted. I know I have to adjust 10 different ways to sit down before I pay attention to a screen. And I'm going to go ahead and reshare our class deck today. Nate and Lamont, making sure that I am not muted again and that the class deck is showing.
You're perfect, Wendy. Good to go.
Okay, again, I'm sorry, guys. You all missed my wonderful intro about writing clearly today. Now the rain is gone because something was happening with my Zoom and muting me. I've had that problem before, and I never know what causes it. I promise my hands were nowhere near the keyboards. Okay, here we are back from break. Woohoo! Now, here's where the intensity begins, friends. You may want to have a pen and pad, and this would be a really great time to open the audience analysis questions handout and the audience analysis crosswalk handout. These are tools that I've developed, which I hope are going to really be helpful to you as you get together with your teams, in particular, the folks who manage whatever the communication structure is in your government agency, and begin to strategize about communicating in plain language with your audience. So grab that, open it up, tuck it on the side somewhere so you can look at it. Start thinking about how your team is going to use that crosswalk in those questions to tweak or revise or in some way improve your plain, clear messaging for your audiences, primary, all your secondary, and your watchdogs. To the person who asked, is the press a watchdog? Absolutely. The press, social media, media, I kind of lump all of those into one great giant watchdog category. But today I broke apart social media from the news media or the press. So here we go. Let's look at audience subtypes. Now, here's a subtype, also a characteristic. In a moment, we're going to look at some characteristics, which could also be called a subtype. Now, there are three subtypes that are pretty very similar. You have your neutral audience. You have your apathetic audience. And then you have the uninformed or just sort of the generalist audience. These are all related. You're liable to have some apathetic people in a fairly neutral audience or in a general audience. In a general audience that may have other characteristics, you're likely to have a number of neutral people. The general audience basically doesn't know anything about your document, your topic, your mission. They just want to understand the business. Ultra plain language, ultra clear, ultra simple, clear words are needed for your generalist audience. Neutral audience, they're the people who are on the fence. They don't really have an opinion. They're neither here nor there. They just want to get the information. Be aware, a neutral audience can change to a no longer neutral audience really quickly. You must be very extremely careful not to upset or offend the neutral audiences. And remember the old saying that Granny used to say, the slip between the cup and the lip is where the hot tea spills in your lap. Be very careful of word choice and context. And the apathetic audience subtype doesn't matter to me. I don't care. They think your message has nothing to do with them. We could ask the question all day, well, why would they be on this website? Why would they be looking at this document to start with? And that's one of those questions we can never really answer for sure because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter why. All you need to know is if that audience thinks your message does not matter to them, you must be more clear and persuasive than ever before. And we have a huge example of an audience that thinks a message doesn't matter to them. It's not necessarily because of apathy in this case, but we're in a social world where the question of vaccination has become such a hot button. And there are so many people who say, well, it doesn't matter to me. I'm not going to get sick, or I don't care, or I'm against this. All of these people are part of an audience subtype. And if you're in an agency that's serving them with that message, it's very important to understand who they are and what they think. Some more important subtypes for you to be aware of and take into account when you are doing your plain language plan and your communication strategic plan. Ideological audiences. Now, remember the vaccine thing, a lot of ideology is involved. These are audiences who are looking through a lens of their own ideology. They are looking for things to label as wrong or right. And with government, particularly, they're looking for the wrong side. And they are always comparing whatever the message from government is against their ideology. Influencers, social media influencers in the room. Raise your hands. That's most of us. Most of us are communications folks, and we are influencing with our own social media. But beware, there are a lot of influencers out there, not necessarily just in social media. And if they are hostile, that could be a problem. Influencers have one reason to exist. They live for it. They're looking to amplify your content and your message, maybe for their purposes, maybe for yours, mostly for their purposes. And then you have your general business audience. Now, why did I call this a subtype instead of just a characteristic? Because we have so many different stakeholders in government who fall into the realm. And remember, with the business audience, and we're all likely to have a large portion of business audience in our general audience. Time is money. Keep it short, be concise, get to the point, keep it short, get to the point. The business audience, whether they actually work in a business or not, see themselves as having a lot to do, and they want your information as quick as possible. So now let's go back and build up to where we are. We started looking at just the principles of plain language. We started talking about why audience is the foundation of plain language. And then we got into these three types, the subtypes, and now it's time for us to look at the characteristics. I think of it this way. Who are these people? Who are these people? What do we know about them? We know we're being watched all the time. And when I say we're being watched, I mean everything I work on that goes on the website, everything that I help my colleagues with that will be put on social media, every graphic that I design to help explain a concept. Someone needs that. Someone's coming to see that. They have questions I need to make sure get answered. But who are they? Who are these people? In the same way that I ask you to realize that you're never not writing for the media, you're never not serving the watchdogs if you are an agency, I want to remind you here, all audiences have more than one characteristic. So you may have a primary audience. Let's say your agency has two primary audiences, and the agency already is struggling with how to communicate clearly to this audience and that audience. And now let's say one of those two primary audiences are technical experts who come to the agency for information. Righto, good, that's great. We've got information and we can give it to you clearly. Let's say the other primary audience are industry leaders that those technical experts work for. But that industry, for whatever, is not really loving your agency's mission right now. Perhaps your agency is putting out regulations that may affect their bottom line. Now you have two primary audiences, but one is hostile, expert, and executive level all at the same time. This can happen a million different ways, and that's why the audience crosswalk tool is so helpful. It will help you find the overlap to understand these folks and know what you can know about them. What can we know about them? Let's start with the hostile audience, because the hostile audience is a very important audience, even if it is not a primary audience. If it is a primary audience, woo-wee, you're really walking a very fine tightrope if you have a primary audience that is hostile to your agency's mission. They are in strong disagreement with your agency. Perhaps they may not want your agency to exist. The agency I worked for previously had a large percentage of hostile audience that wanted the agency to be just demolished and gotten rid of. That is quite a communications challenge. More importantly, the great news I have to tell you is the answer is plain language. The answer is plain language. Hostile audiences are, especially these days, publicly angry. They feel safe making trouble online and on social media. They are absolutely delighted to go on the national and global media news programs and speak poorly of your agency and your products because they are just mad. My goodness. Important tip here, pro tip. You can never turn a hostile audience completely into a happy, loving advocate audience. You cannot fix it. What you can do is recognize that hostile audiences are not likely to become your advocate. They're going to remain hostile. But you have the ability to learn the factors that contribute to that audience's hostility. And you can shape your messages product by product to reduce each of those factors. This is a risk management audience. You can never not have them, and you cannot fix them. Once you have a hostile audience, there will always be some level of hostility, either in tiny amounts or larger amounts. What you can do is examine those factors of hostility and begin to address those with plain, clear messaging to reduce the amount of just red hot fury that's coming your way. And a great way to do this is to get your writing team together for this project, whatever it is, this report, even if it's just a news release going out to the media, but you know it's going to land with a bunch of really angry folks. Get the team together, start going through those factors and figuring out whether that audience is large or powerful enough to actually make a difference if there is a problem with that particular product. You want to look at your hostile audience, product by product, and you want to take a team approach. Many heads need to approach these kinds of problems. Many team members will come up with insights maybe you didn't think about that may be the key to a product that could have blown up because of a hostile audience, but maybe mostly nothing will happen because you dealt with it, understanding the characteristics of that audience. Along with hostility, the little sister of the hostile audience is the critics. Oh my gosh, everybody is criticizing government. Why? It is the nature of the beast. It is a human need. And we are in a democracy, so we strive to make sure that our government is, I'm going to use a buzzword alert, jargon alert, transparent. transparent. I spent 10 years railing against the word transparent and its sister transparency. Oh, I hated it. It's such a jargony government word, but I have come to love it because transparent means you can see through it. And many of the things that we have seen affecting our agencies and our agencies' missions over the past several years have to do with the fact that people couldn't understand government messaging. It means they couldn't see through it. And so now we have more critics than ever. Critics expect that you are not being on the up and up, that they are sure you are misleading. And they are always looking for an opportunity to either challenge your message or challenge any data that your message was built on, because they think critically. And all watchdog audiences fall into this category. All, by definition, they are criticizing. They are watching everything you do. They are looking for the gotcha moment. And I'm not saying that because I hate media. No, I was media. I love media. I work with media all the time. They're watching because it's their job. It is their job to inform the people about government. And that's a good thing. The watchdogs can help us way more than they can hurt us if we are aware of what it is they're actually about. Now, remember, all expert audiences are pretty critical, and they revel in pointing out errors, real or perceived, factual or contextual. So that is why it is so important to test every audience assumption. I just explained to a friend over break, you want to make sure you have a cold reader who knows nothing about this to read it out loud. That's how you're going to hear the tone. Cold readers who know nothing about your project are the secret to all success when it comes to government, because the cold reader is going to react in the way that that audience you're trying to reach is going to react. They know nothing about it, or they know a lot about it. So back to critics. Critics, they don't actually care whether they know anything about it or not. They are simply looking to criticize. And remember, there's a gigantic and dangerous critical audience in social media, as well as the news media, as well as all the attorneys, as well as. Now, I promised you earlier that we were going to talk about one internal audience. This is an internal external audience, the executive audience. Most of the time, all of our work stress in government has to do with what we're trying to do to please the executives above us. Government is inherently hierarchical. We're always answering to the rungs of the ladder above our pay grade. So it is imperative, and we learn this anyway when we're federal employees, you got to get to the point. Executive audiences are almost always critical and almost always expert. They expect you to be clear. They expect you to get to the point, and they expect that point to be related to the mission. And remember, the mission is the work we do every day. They expect that everything that we're putting out for that external audience is going to be related to what we do, and it's got to be clear. Experts challenge your conclusions. I work in an OIG, and so when we go with our draft reports for senior leadership review, there's a lot of challenging, as there should be. They are the folks who are responsible for all the work that we've done. And when something blows up, they will be the ones who go to the hill, not us down in the report production part of the process. So they're absolutely going to challenge conclusions and all of the little parts of your message to make sure that it supports the mission and does not contradict the mission. So never make the mistake of not regarding your executives as an expert. They will always act as experts, whether you believe they have expertise or not. They expect message clarity. They overreact to unclear messages. Have you ever had the bosses go, blah, just go crazy and lose it over something that was no big deal? And especially if it was something as simple as a word. And all of you in communications are like, no big deal. When in doubt, take it out. It's just a word. But it's important to understand that that executive expert is going to most likely have an emotional reaction as well, because any mission critical message means that they are the ones responsible. So be very careful about clarity and manage up, friends, manage up. Understand how people take in messages and what happens in our brain. So when in this bullet where I say neural expectation, remember every expert and every executive has expectations. Work persuasively and clearly with plain language to manage those expectations before the product is ever done during the planning stages. And yeah, I know you're all rolling your eyes. The answer is plain language. Use plain language, the techniques for presenting the message and writing the message to manage that expectation about the message and deliver on that expectation. Once again, to remind you, anything on a website is going to mean a mixed audience. It just is. Now, we're going to talk about a particular time when the audience is less mixed in just a minute. But the key here is that we are challenged to write clearly for all those mixed audiences. And now it's time to take on the big gorilla in the ring, because nothing causes a plain language effort in an agency to fail and go away faster than that disconnect of who our audience is and how we write to experts. Very few federal agencies are really only devoted mission-wise to a general audience at a low level of expertise. There are a few, and they are significant. For example, I would say, like the Social Security Administration. I've done a lot of work with that agency over the past 15 years. What a challenge to take these incredibly complicated concepts and make them simple enough for octogenarian grandparents to understand. It's hard. And that's the great majority of their audience. But for the rest of us, we are always aware that experts are a big part of our audience. And sometimes we think we have experts when maybe we don't, but experts are a big issue. And the reason is because there's a lot of concern about talking down to people with education and expertise. And remember, I told you about that heartburn about writing for the media? There's a lot of heartburn about dumbing down or oversimplifying a message for experts. So let's spend a little time on this. This is probably the most important thing you're going to learn today to take back and act on. So let's start with the Nielsen-Norman group. Many of you are familiar with that. I hope many means a whole lot of you. The Nielsen-Norman group is an incredible resource for data to understand government communications. That's the company that began as far back as the early 90s to study and publish about how people take in information from screens. So they started out primarily gathering data and researching how we do things online, how we do things on a screen. And now they just have an incredible body of research that's amazing for all forms of communication. Because remember, friends, the internet has changed everything. We don't even read paper anymore the way we used to. Everyone now, and even from children to the children of every age, approaches written content similarly based on what we've been trained over the past 30 years to do online. And the Nielsen-Norman Group has helped us understand that for a long time. So I went to the Nielsen-Norman Group 2 years ago to learn about communicating with experts because my client was struggling and I needed to help them and really teach them what to do. And I landed on a study that said, all expert audiences prefer plain language. Of only a tiny percentage of people said no, they didn't want plain language. They liked it to be as junked up as possible. And I was very excited. And 2 years ago, I taught from the basis of that study. But guess what? A more recent study shows that experts are actually looking for the jargon of their field. To them, it's a credibility factor. It tells them they can trust you if you speak their language. And experts have detailed questions. They need detailed answers, but they don't want the basics again. They don't want freshman 101 level anymore because they need it quick and fast, and they need it to be in a way they can understand and relate to it. Remember, communication that your audience can relate to. So here's some other things about experts. To an expert, jargon's not jargon. To an expert, they spent years in school and hundreds of thousands of dollars to learn this vocabulary that they share with other people who do the same thing they do. It's a very closely held thing, the words that we use and how we talk to each other. And when I do the full principles of plain language class, I go in depth about how we all speak in jargon, whether we believe we do or not, because even in our own little group, we may have certain phrases and acronyms and other jargon words that we use. It's specific to us in our group. It marks us as an insider. It's how we talk out in the hallway. But when we're talking about some form of expertise in a field of study, whether that study is technology or not, now it's very important. I don't know if you're a good communicator, if you don't know any communications jargon, and believe me, we have a lot. We've used some here today. It's the defining characteristic of our field, and so we cling to it. And I'm not going to trust you if you don't understand what I'm saying, but we're both supposed to be experts and the same kind of expert. But question for you, friends, how likely is it that all the experts that you're talking to will come from the same field or be the same kind of experts? Yeah, you're right. Not very. Here's what to do. Here's the real, some real effective tools to help you. So the first thing is, start by understanding your audience, define them, and make sure you're clear that they are the primary or target audience, and know how much technology you have at your fingertips, how many resources you have to help you as you write this content for this mixed audience that includes critical experts. Now, we also know from research that experts find progressive disclosure unhelpful. And in that study I just told you about, That was one of the things that experts really hammered on in their commentary. Progressive disclosure means that you're explaining as you go along. Now, I am constantly coaching my writers in my agency to get better at progressive disclosure, to not bury important information in informational footnotes or endnotes. Guess what? Nobody reads the footnotes. If it's important, it's got to be in the narrative if you want anybody to get that information and those sorts of things. I make those speeches, oh my goodness, at least twice a week to someone. I am always speechifying. I'm always trying to teach my folks the best way to make their message clear. And in our particular kind of products, progressive disclosure, explaining as we go along, is crucial because our primary audience is an internal audience. But we have so many other audience subtypes that are watching. So clarity is the guiding light that I live by. And that's what I am always pushing for in the context of our mission in this agency. But experts find progressive disclosure to be off-putting, and they see that as dumbing down. Experts are more likely to think you have dumbed down a concept just because you define the concept for the non-expert reader. So use as much technology as you can to hide the stuff that the non-experts need to understand if the expert is your target, intended, primary, okay? Now, what does that mean? Hide the stuff they don't mean. Well, hopefully you're going to have the resources, no matter how small your agency is, to be able to put a tooltip or a mouse over code on particular jargon words for that 10% audience, the non-expert audience. Use technology. Now, I do not believe in glossaries. I do not believe in any of that. It's wasted paper. It's wasted space. Nobody uses them in a report, in that kind of product. They never will. To expect that somebody is going to take anything physical or digital and make a mark so that they can flip back from what they're reading to see what that acronym meant or the definition of that term you never explained, to think that people are going to do that. Oh, it's so amusing. No one's going to do that. You don't do that. I don't do that. No one's going to do that. But that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is you've got a product on a website. The primary audience is experts with expertise in a particular field, but you're going to have a lot of secondary audiences coming to that. So if I hide that definition so that my other folks can just roll their mouse over it and see what it means, but I haven't distracted the attention of the expert or the usefulness of that particular product, then that is success. I've now managed to serve the needs of an expert audience and a non-expert audience, maybe in a tiny, tiny degree, but that is success. Take advantage of all of the things that your agency has the tools to do to be able to write for the expert and use their language, but also explain their language to others who are not experts in that same field. Use as many, and I really do mean as many infographics, glance boxes, and sidebars on your website as possible, so those non-tech audiences, those non-expert audiences, if they need to, they can just glance a little. They're not going to bookmark a report and shuffle back 20 pages to remember that term that you dropped, but they will glance to the side of the screen to see that meaning that's there. Because as soon as they hit the item they don't understand, they will come to a dead stop and they'll immediately begin looking for, what are you talking about? How can I understand this? And they will give you possibly as much as 3 seconds before they just go. So you've got possibly 3 seconds for them to get understanding, to stick with you. That may not matter if it's just some dumb old reporter or some grad student who has landed on your website and has to write a paper or do some work on their thesis, but it may matter a great deal if that audience is that congressional staffer who's trying to get some information to answer a question for a legislatively elected Hill member. Link to other resources. Experts want links. Everybody else, maybe not. But experts want you to link to other sites with research that's similar to what you're publishing. They want you to link to other places where they can get additional information because they expect your information to be concise and quick, and they want you to link to a place where they can go and get more in depth. Many agencies have started to learn this, and they have what we would ordinarily consider to be the summary or the abstract version in the easy to get to place. And then they have a link to the more detailed, really nitty gritty information to take that expert there. And plain language is always the answer, my friends. As you do your strategic communications planning and as you do your project management on creation of your content and all your products, build in time for a plain language review. Plain language review is not normal editing, okay? Plain language review is someone who's had plain language training, is a solid, clear writer, has nothing to do with this project, did not work on the report, totally cold. Right before it goes on the website, you ask them to read it one last time just for clarity. Just tell me if you understand everything, Bob. That's all I need to know. A plain language review can save you untold hours of trouble later. Bob will spot something that doesn't make any sense in a hot minute when he reads through it, because it's going to stop him dead. And he's going to say, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about here. Bob's already had plain language training and he understands. That's the key. Someone who understands plain language is a solid writer and a cold reader. Test your assumptions with cold readers every single time at the level of expertise you're writing to. If you're writing to a CISO, an information security chief, right, then go to the guy who's like the deputy CISO in your agency and say, would you please take a look at this for me? Just 5 minutes is all I need. Is this clear? At your level of expertise. That will get you out of so many twists and turns. It will also give you a basis to be able to speak with real authority to your leadership. When leadership goes, that's not our audience, or that's not how we talk to our audience, you'll be able to say, we've got the data, we did the research, we tested our assumptions, and this is what we found. We really think this is, in our best professional recommendation, this is the way to say this clearly. So that's expert audiences. Expert audiences are the biggest challenge of all for us, aside for hostile audiences, of course. Experts are looking for something. And agencies, as I told you at the beginning, always think that all of their audiences are the highest level of expert, no matter what. That's what they think. And so it's up to us to really understand and be able to help our leadership understand exactly who these people are that we're writing for. So it's very important that we take a look at something that we don't think about very often. And that's, how do all audiences act? And how do where do experts fall in that continuum of all the general audiences? So let me share with you something, a couple of things really important. This applies to experts and everybody else. Everybody. Research shows us that no one reads every single line in every single sentence in every single paragraph anymore. We are all skimming. Every person, experts, executives, hostile, critical, lawyers, internal, external, every audience, everyone is skimming, and they are not skimming in a straight line right down the page. They are hopping all over your web page. They are hopping all over your PDF document, shifting to find what they need. They only read what is interesting or relative or relevant or answering their questions for them, not for you. They are not starting with introduction and ending at, and in conclusion. They are hopping all over, looking for the answers to their questions. Now, during the study, they found that even the highest level of experts who had the most pride in their expertise, let's put it that way, pride, they were the ones who were jumping around in the content to find the sections that mattered to them or were most interesting to them. Everybody does it. The only people who read linearly these days, especially in government agencies, are the people who make the content and the people who approve the content in some way. Everyone else, once it's released, they are looking for what they need. Now, another important thing for you to be aware of, because in this day and age, we think of techie or tech savvy or expert as all synonymous, but not all experts are techies and not all techies are experts, right? Not everyone is tech savvy, folks. In this same study, while they were hopping around looking for the content that they found relevant or interesting, some of the experts got tripped up on technology because they weren't all tech experts. In the exposition of the study, they explained how a PhD got stuck in a PDF document and had a tech problem and how it really messed with comprehension. Understand that not everybody is tech savvy, and expertise could mean a lot of things. So always be looking for ways to create shortcuts in the content because everybody is looking for that. That means summaries, boxes to pull out, bottom line, main point. You need to know something that's eye-catching, lots of headings and subheadings, lots of white space to send us across that web page in the classic 2 swipes across the top and 1 swipe down, the F pattern, so that we find what we're looking for. Because we are not going to reread until we decide that the content matters to us. That is true for grandma, and it is true for the highest level expert. So here's our exercise. We are not going to do this together because we only have a few minutes more left in our time together. This is my first appeal to you to do this, to see if it's going to make a difference for you. Take the audience questions. Pick any document, either a project you're working on right now, something that's been out for a while, whatever. Do it alone or get your team together. Of course, I'm advocating get your team together. Pull out the matrix and those questions. Go down that list of questions. Start asking, who am I writing for? What do I know about them? What characteristics do they have? Are they important to my mission? How can they affect my mission positively? How can they affect my mission negatively? And start looking at all the levels. secondary audience, primary audience, who are the watchdogs. Write a strategy sentence for each one of these. Once you see the intersections in that crosswalk among all of these different subtypes, it's going to begin making light bulbs go off, and it's going to really inspire some creativity from your team. Suddenly, you're going to feel like you have a different understanding of who you're writing for. And then along with that strategy about who they are and what you think you need to tell them, list the plain language technique you're going to use. We're going to write clearly. We're going to put it in active voice. We're going to use a lot of visuals here. There you go. Now you have a new way to interact and communicate with your audience. And really, effective communication is what it's all about. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to switch into a little bit different topic here. As I promised you at the beginning, when I told you what we were going to go over today, I promised you we're going to look at ways you could effectively communicate with any audience. And so we're going to do that next. I would like to take a 2-minute break for everybody to have their 7th inning stretch before the end of our game. So take 2 minutes, refresh your beverage, take a stretch, run and grab whatever you need. We're going to come back and start talking about effective communication. And we're going to start tying all the threads of all these things I've been giving you today together. And when you finish today, you're going to have something you can use right now immediately. So 2 minutes, we will come back at 2:49, actually 2.5. I'm going to give you 2.5 minutes. We'll come back at 2:49. And if anyone would like to stay with me, ask a question or come on mic and ask for help or discuss anything, I will be here the whole time. As always, I'll be here for you. So take your break. We'll see you in 2.5 minutes. Lamont and Nate, everything going okay behind the magic curtain there?
Yes, Wendy, it's going great. Thank you so much. We are all set and ready to go.
Awesome. I am still, actually, let me see. I was going to say I'm still off chat, but perhaps I can open the chat this way. I can, yay.
Yes, and really quickly, a quick update that yes, we will be uploading the recording, any related slides or resources to our webpage at he.american.edu. And just take a look at your Eventbrite emails for real-time updates when the video will be available. Thank you.
Thank you, Lamont. I have found it interesting to have a brace and be doing everything with my left hand. And you guys have been so patient. Was somebody coming on with a question?
Yes, if you can hear me, thank you. I noticed a comment in the chat about most people reading on their phones now, and we're trying to do a redesign of our website based on the fact that most people look mobily.
Yeah.
So how would they do a glance to the side, or would you do a call out? Would you do a highlight in text of keywords? What's your recommendation?
That is a great question. Can I answer that when we come back from break? Because I'd like to address that
please.
for everyone.
I think a lot of people would find that helpful.
Thank you. That is a great question. Oh, great question. I don't even know why I didn't think of it. Awesome. Thank you. You're my favorite today. Okay, and it is time. We're back. Okay, I always like to give everybody a few seconds to get adjusted. I know for me, I have back pain, so I have special pillows and I have to shift on my cushion. Okay, we're all shifted and comfortable now. While you were taking your break, I had an incredible question. Okay, the question is this: Most people are using their mobile phones. We're all shifting to responsive design so that our agency websites can be used more effectively on mobile phones. So how the heck would somebody glance to the side of a screen? What would you do in that case? Wonderful question. Thank you so much for asking. And I wish I had thought of it in advance. So the question of responsive design is one of those projects that's affecting all of us these days because it matters, because we all know that everybody, that means all audiences, are using these things right here. So I am not a tech expert, so I could not tell you the technical hows of this. I'm going to refer you to your own wizards in your agency. But I want to encourage you to go out there, as my teenager would say, give it a goog, because there are a number of new technological tools that apps have that allow you to literally touch a word and have a little box come up and say whatever you want it to say. There are other tools that you don't even have to touch the word. The standardized tools that we have are the tools that are built into the phone, where you can highlight, select, and then you can tap an icon, and whatever you've selected can either be changed into another language. You can elucidate more and explain it. So I would encourage you, there are a number of different techniques, and you're exactly right. If you're on a phone, you're not looking at the side of the screen. I was simply thinking about desktops and laptops. My failing, thank you. But you're right, everybody's doing everything on a phone, but the technology is there. There's so many different ones, I can't even list them all. There's one that exists that I'm aware of because I was in a product demo a few months ago where you shake your phone if you want a definition. So if you're reading, you touch the word, you shake the phone, and everything you need to know about that word and the definition comes up. There are other technologies that involve using the phone camera. Most of us are familiar with using the QR codes. You hover your phone camera over it, and it will cause a website to open to give you more information. Incredibly wonderful if you are in a national park. And I have used this technology, and it is amazing. It takes me to a place that tells me everything I want to know, from the lowest to the highest level of information and expertise about that particular park. So you can use that kind of technology for other agency missions as well. And that's going to mean that when you start your planning meetings and the communication meetings, you've got to have tech in the room with you. That's the key. That's the real answer to your question. When you start planning the message, you've got to have tech in the room, because you start saying, well, we want to do this, but our primary audience, our intended target audience is at this level of expertise, but we already know 40% of the actual users are not tech experts. Again, the data that you're going to get from your website people is going to tell you what the percentage of actual experts is in your audience. Perhaps you think 80% of your audience is tech experts, and it's really 30%. So you want to know that. You want to be able to turn to your techie guy, or in the case of our pandemic life, you want to be able to tap him on your gallery and say, Joe, how can we do this? We need this to be so easily accessible. What's the best app out there right now for this purpose, for this mission? It's changing every day. There are so many different technological solutions. I wouldn't know where to begin, but they are there. Some of them involve a camera, some of them involve shaking the phone, touching the phone. There's even technology that allows you to concentrate your eye on a particular thing on the screen for a certain number of seconds, and it will activate artificial intelligence and ask you, do you need a definition of this word? Can I help you with this? I'm sure that's probably out of most of our budget ranges, but it's worth pursuing because there's a lot of incredible technology that's free. And if it is safe, meaning secure, and your agency has approved using it, explore it, go for it, but start with your technical wizards with you as you plan. Okay, here we are. We got 20 minutes to finish learning all this good, important stuff. And then we're going to talk and answer questions and do whatever you need before our time together is through today. So let's go into effective communications with any audience. That beautiful question about using phones was exactly related to this. Communicating for people to use their devices means we're communicating with every and any audience. First, you got to know your audience. That's what we've been talking about all day. Audience analysis is a powerful tool. If you want to communicate well, you got to know who you're talking to. You got to know the audience's questions. They have come to you for answers. So our job is to deliver. And you got to know the audience's jargon, whether or not the majority of your primary audience is expert. That audience speaks a language. Know their language and explain or define your language. Use judgment about how much of their language to use based on all that data you've gathered from your in-house resources. Respect the audience's time. I can't say this often enough. I know my folks in my agency and all the people I coach, the people I tutor, and all of the students that I teach when I do workshops and seminars. Can't say it often enough. Say the most important thing first, get to the point, and then support it. Do not start and say, okay, in this product, we're going to talk about something. Now, there's a whole lot of things you need to know about this, background. And then eventually we're going to get to it. Start to the point with the point, the most important thing, and then support it. It is the secret to holding your audience for that precious 3 seconds. Use all the principles of plain language. All the principles of plain language. Inevitably, when I am asked to come into an organization and do an audit to figure out how to help them communicate more clearly, I always find they're doing one or two things really well, but they're not using any of the other techniques of plain language. Use all the principles. Use active voice. Use pronouns, use lists and numbered lists, stack them, use tables to break down complicated concepts. Unless you are in a world where 508 is a nightmare, I'm there, I get it. Then you're going to want to incorporate your planning for 508 accessibility compliance into your plain language technique, but use all of the principles from 1 to 13. Don't leave any of them out. It's going to make the difference in everything. Use as many visuals as possible. Remember, we know that experts are looking for their language, and we know that all of the other audiences that are not expert are trying to understand. We also know from actual research that people spend more time on the visuals than the words. So make sure you've got really good, clear infographics and charts and other visuals. And this one, make everything easy to skim. Now, back in olden times when we still went to offices and I still went from agency to agency with my little rolling suitcase, of all my plain language materials, I used to do a little thing where I would stand in front of the audience and say, now remember, this right here, the wiggling finger means everything has to be easy to scan. Meaning I'm going to scan through it. And then I was hoisted on my own petard in a class when a student reminded me that in this world that we live in now, scan is a digital operation that takes a form of a picture of a document and makes it digital. So using the word scan was confusing my audience. I've changed it to skim because we all think of reading in terms of either reading closely or skimming through. So remember this motion. I need to be able to put my finger and go, whoop, and skim right through it to find what I want, because I will not engage until I do find what's relevant for me. And that's true with experts and everybody who's not an expert. This is how we read now. We must know the content matters or answers a question or there's a purpose before we bother. Why? Because we have 800 bajillion really fun things to read right here on our phone. Take the delivery medium into account. I can't believe I totally forgot mobile phones. It's crucial to what we're doing right now. Everything we do, we got to think, is this going on the website? Are we emailing this? Is this, if you use a service like Granicus, we used to call it Gov Delivery for emailing large numbers of subscribers, it's important to know how that medium works. If something goes wrong technically with that particular service, it could cause your message to get garbled and make a mess. That means you're resending the message. What's the chance that people are going to read it the second time? That's right, 0. Use technology to serve those mixed levels of expertise and make sure you really get the technology. And here we go. This is it, the big moment you've been waiting for, my friends. The number one way to improve all of your writing, all of your clarity instantly, even if you did not do anything else or use any other plain language principle, is, yep, you guessed it, it's a plain language principle. Use simple, clear words. We're going to spend our last few minutes together on that because it is so crucial to this question of what experts are expecting versus experts also saying they prefer plain, clear documents that are written in plain language, and the need to write plain, clear language for all of our other secondary audiences, and the crucial need to be very clear for the watchdogs to prevent them from taking control of our message. So all you have to do is make word choice your guiding star in plain language. And as you learn and practice and perfect all of the other plain language principles and techniques, clinging to simpler, clearer word choice will be the one thing that will make more difference than anything else. So last year, I had the experience of being in a new situation with new leadership, and I had a person who was a bit skeptical and told me in a meeting that plain language, not needed, not a thing here. And I then had an issue to overcome. I then needed to be able to persuade someone who was very important to my mission. The universe smiled on me, and not long afterwards, I was asked by that manager to edit a document without making any changes to the document. And the document was unclear. Fortunately for me, though, I have the ultimate plain language hack at my disposal, which I've shared with you. And so I'm going to unshare this screen here for just a moment, and I'm going to share another thing with you. It's in your handouts. Thank you for your patience. Let's get it up so Zoom can see it. In your handouts, you have the ultimate plain language hack. It's a tool I love to share. I am so proud of this tool because I've been developing it throughout my entire government career. This is the simple word choices chart. And this is a tool that you can have at your fingertips to go and find a better option to choose a clearer word. And you'll notice on the right side here, we have the simpler word column, and on the left, we have the clutter column. Now, remember, I enjoined you early in our time together today to quit writing in clutterhand. You know, as my grandpa used to say, never use a $10 word when a $2 word will do. And that's the simpler word guiding star. And the other is never use 4 words when 1 word will do. You'll see here in the eliminate the clutter column that we have these phrases that are all anywhere from 3 to 5 or 6 words long. And in almost every case, they can be replaced with 1 clear, simple word. Most of the time, it just means digging out the buried verb that's been hidden in there. So I want to encourage you to know your audience and use simple, clear words, whether or not your audience is experts, because you can still write clearly using simple words, even if you need to use the expert jargon, the language of expertise for a particular expert audience. And here's what I mean. I know there are some folks from my home agency on in our class today, and they're all going to howl because this is my number one thing that I rail against. We are implementing and mitigating all over the place in government. Implement is a terrible bureaucratic jargon word. I weed it out whenever possible because I've given you 3 options here, but there are approximately 30 different ways to clearly say what we mean as government people in reports with the word implement. So I want to encourage you to use the Simpler Words handout to help you improve everything. And I want you to do a little experiment. Sometime, I know, I'm going to say sometime when you have time, and you're going to say, but Wendy, I haven't had time since 1986. And I totally understand that too. So whenever the universe gives you an opportunity and you're inclined, take a document, take something, what we call in the news business, raw copy. That means it's been written, but it's never been edited or examined. Take a piece of raw copy, do nothing. Don't put it in active voice. Don't correct the commas. Don't add pronouns. Don't add headings and subheadings. Do nothing but change the bureaucratese words into simpler, clearer words. Look at the end result and read it out loud. There will be an amazing difference right away. It'll be amazing when you see what you can do just by adopting clear word choice. You will never want to use those bureaucratic words again. 90% of plain language work is in understanding the audience and using simpler, clearer words. Word choice matters. And word order matters. And we know from the great Tom Stoppard that words are so important that if you get the right ones in the right order, you can change the world. So I'm going to go back and we're going to finish up our time here today looking at the end of the story here. I'm sorry. Oh, come on, you can do it. Zoom is misbehaving, guys. Okay, we're back. So, necessary technical terminology. Remember, progressive disclosure means I'm explaining it as I go along. And we use a lot of necessary technical terminology that also may fall into the realm of bureaucratic word choice. So what do I do then? In that case, use one of those technical solutions to explain that terminology, or get really bold. Get really bold. And instead of explaining right away what you just said, explain ahead of time. Instead of explaining when I said it, explain ahead of time. And that goes something like this: short, clear explanation, and then I introduce the jargon to you. So I might explain a process that's very complicated, and then I might say, that's called, and use the jargon word. It's a way for me to make sure my expert knows that I speak his or her language, but I can still describe it, and I'm not doing the state a jargon word and then saying, that means. Instead, I'm explaining it first, and then I'm saying, that's called. That's a good way for all your audiences to immediately begin to click in and understand and follow you. Now, anything that's unnecessary, any government stuff, any corporate buzzwords, oh my gosh, if one more person says onboarding to me, I don't know what I will do. Get rid of that stuff. None of that is meaningful. Nobody really understands what it used. It's just a habit and a trend. Somebody started saying onboarding, which is an airline word in relation to HR back in the 90s. Now we don't even know how to say hired and started. Okay. So take a look at that. And again, stop writing in clutterhand. You can do this. Dig out those action words. They matter. Verbs are the most important part of anything you write. Why? Because they indicate what's being done or undone. And here's my big alert before we end up. Acronyms are jargon, folks. When they ask me for my last words, before I close my eyes the final time, I will say, get rid of the acronyms. No abbreviations. Reduce or eliminate as much as you can. And please understand that a huge percentage of the acronyms that are stored in your head do not have any meaning for anyone else outside your head. They most likely are the acronyms of your daily work that you've picked up over time. And there will be a considerable number of social media abbreviations, IDK, I don't know how that happened, in your head as well, along with crazy emoji cartoons. Recognize it, become very hyper aware about abbreviations and acronyms, and use those techniques to reduce or eliminate. Here you go. First, shorten them. Don't abbreviate at all. Instead, talk about the system or the office, the council. This is particularly important if everyone in your agency has gotten into the unbreakable habit of referring to parts of the agency by the initials of the name of the office. And they think the rest of the world gets that too, but they almost never do. And even though you may have defined it on page 2 when it first appeared, by the time you get to page 50, by the time you get to page 5, I don't remember what you told me that was, and I'm not going to flip back and look and find out. I don't have time for it. So if you can tell me the office, you can name that office and then tell me the office. You can name that system or that program, that council, and then just say the council. Instead of giving me a string of letters I have to remember, I'm going to take in your message and retain it. And that's the key. Message retention is comprehension. Spell it out. Oh my gosh. Make a rule. Make a rule. There will be one either in your in-house style guide, or if you don't have one, have your content creation editor team make the rule. Here's my rule. If you're using a letter string, it has to be because you need to use it a lot. I need to see it at least 5 times over 10 pages because my adult brain cannot understand and retain it without repetition. So if you're not going to use it a number of times, don't abbreviate, just spell it out and shorten. So here's our final challenge, my friends, and then we're gonna get a little bit of housekeeping information, take your questions. I want to challenge you to do that exercise where you go into your projects. Start with just one document. Go through and just change one word to a simpler word in a paragraph. Then go to the next paragraph, change 2 words. Do this through the whole document. Go back, add 1 more principles of plain language technique. Go back, this time insert headings and subheadings. Go back, do this document by document. Before you know it, you will have a library of award-winning, clear, plain language documents. You'll be being called out by the Center for Plain Language Studies. The Plain Language Action and Information Network will hold your agency up as a standard to shoot for. If you begin doing this and practicing this, you'll be amazed at how everything will improve. And it all started with understanding your audience. Know who you're writing for, know what they need to know the language they speak, know the language they expect, and you can knock it out of the park. Your messages will always land exactly like they need to. You'll no longer have those high risks of hostile watchdogs deciding for you what you meant to say. And with that, we're going to take questions, deep thoughts, better ideas than I have. Start typing in the chat, and Laman and Nate are going to help me. I'm going to make sure you have these resources, this I was going to say tape. That tells you how old I am. This video will be available for you, and you'll be able to write all these down. Don't worry about trying to hurry and write it all down now. And very important, if you are a federal employee in a federal agency and you want plain language training for your team or your group, please go to plainlanguage.gov. The Plain Language Action and Information Network offers this training. I did this training for many, many years. I've continued to do this training. You have to have at least 20 people because all our trained volunteers who do this instruction are volunteers, and many of them have to take their own leave to do the teaching. So if you're federal, please go to plainlanguage.gov if you want training. If you're not federal, or if you need something different than specific plain language training, or if you need to really drill into a plain language issue, please feel free to contact me at any time. And if you ever have a question or need help with anything, all you have to do is contact me at my email. My goodness, most of you already have just in the past 2 weeks. Just shoot me an email at Wagner-Smith@gmail.com. Remind me that you were in my class at AU or GovLoop or wherever, just so I know how we know each other. I will always, always get back to you and answer your question as soon as I can. I promise. And all of you who have emailed me in the past couple of weeks, I will be answering each of you individually. Just please hold on. It's going to take me a while to weed through that large number of emails. Finally, last but not least, before we take your questions, one of you sent me a lovely compliment and asked me where I got these dimples. And I just want to tell you, it was a gift from my mama. So thank you all. It is such a great and wonderful gift to be able to do this work. It is the most fulfilling thing I do. I'm going to go back to the question page and I'm going to unshare and let Lamont and Nate let me know what you need to know. If you want to come on mic, they will tell you the rules so you can ask your question aloud.
Thank you so much, Wendy. We still have about exactly 10 minutes left for a Q&A portion of this session. Please feel free to send your questions through chat. You can even raise your hand. We'll unmute you. Just a reminder, we will be posting the recording and related resources on our website at key.american.edu. And quickly wanted to thank you all so much for joining us for our workshop session today. We also want to share our immense gratitude and love to Wendy for her expert advice and such a engaging, timely discussion on how federal leaders can target their message clearly and write in plain language. Now, before we go, I'm also dropping a quick poll for feedback for today's session. This is purely for our own internal view. We're not going to share this. We'll leave it on until the end of the Q&A, so take your time. And to start us off with the Q&A, we did have one come in recently, and it is, what about if you define the acronym on its first use and then use it for the rest of the document?
Oh my goodness, thank you. That's a wonderful question. I will tell you that is probably the worst rule that was ever created. And here's why. In government, we use so many letter strings, so many abbreviations that we overwhelm the neurology of the human being. So here's what we know from actual research. The more letter strings that our brain has to interpret for us in any given sentence or paragraph, or on any given full page, whatever that may mean, the slower we will read, even if we already know the acronyms and abbreviations, the slower we will read and the less we will understand. So key number one is we must limit the number of abbreviations. It's okay to abbreviate. It absolutely is. But have really strict parameters, boundaries around how you're going to do that. So here's my personal rule. If you are in a document from my agency and we have defined the letters that are the name, the initials of the agency on the cover and in each of the sections of the front matter, then I feel safe assuming that you know what SBA means all the way through the document. But the likelihood that you will remember something I defined on page 1 when you see it again on page 4 is very, very small. The likelihood that you'll flip back is 0. And this is where even a rule like the one I gave you, it needs to be used at least 5 times over the course of 10 pages, or it needs to be used multiple times in this blog or whatever. That rule doesn't matter if I have to go back and see it. So if I used it on page 1, but then I didn't need to use it again until page 3 or 4, my reader has forgotten it. That's just a fact of how brains work. Even we know from research that even abbreviations that we know and commonly use, when we read them, our brain has to slow down to interpret them. So there's a technique you can use. Again, you have to have a standard set in your agency. If your agency uses a standard type of editorial style, like I'll just use the one we use, Chicago manual style, there will be guidelines within that style book that you can look to. If you have an in-house style, you can set your own rule. You can say, for example, if you haven't used it at least 5 times in 2 pages, don't use it, just shorten, right? Or spell it out each time. But if it's one that has to be used and it's going to be used frequently, set the standard that every so many uses or every so many pages, the whole term will be spelled out again. You don't have to then put the initials in parentheses again. You just have to spell it out. So I've got an abbreviation. It's an abbreviation I'm not familiar with. I've been reading and skimming. I kind of think I know what it is. Now I'm on page 5. There it is again. Now I'm on page 6. They've spelled out, oh, that's what it is. Now I know it's the office of such and such. And I remember. So ever so many pages, spell it out again fully for the reader. There are standards for that you can find, and you're going to want to work with the team in your agency that is responsible for setting and getting approval for editorial style. But that's the best way to do it.
Love that.
Because nobody looks at acronyms, lists, or glossaries.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And we have another question. Just to synthesize, what are your 3 rules for clear and effective communication?
My 3 rules: clear words, simple, clear word choice. Word choice is everything. Number 1. Number 2, why am I writing this? It is the question I ask myself before I put my fingers on the keyboard before every document. Why am I writing this? What is this for? Number 3, who am I writing for? Now, I know you're all going, wait, that's number 3. We just spent 2 hours with this lady telling us it's number 1. That's just my process. So your process might be, who am I writing for? What am I writing? What words do I need to use? Mine is a little bit different, but that's just mine. What I want to encourage you to do is think in terms of how powerful the actual words are and how important it is to know the person who's going to receive the words. Know their characteristics. Know, as Granny would say, know whether they're for or against you, and know exactly what you're trying to say. 90% of the reason I will always have a job is because 90% of the time when something is unclear, it's because the content creator didn't really know exactly how to say what they were going to say. So know what you were going to say, and then we can help you know how to say it. Next.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Yes, I don't see any questions for the Q&A so far. Just wanted to clarify that I will be resending the check-in form for the certificate of participation soon, and that we will be providing all the slides and resources on our website. If you'd like to personally share out your question yourself, please make sure to do so. Feel free to unmute, and we will be right here with you.
And while you're doing that, I also want to let you guys know, I'm the great warrior against redundancy, but my very favorite phrase in the world is free gift. And so I've given you a couple in your handouts. Not number 1, because they are numbered. One of the free gifts is the editing checklist. This was developed by a senior plain language trainer I worked with several years ago on putting together the plain language training class for the federal government. And she developed this editing checklist. It is by far the greatest tool I have ever used. I want you to please share it out with everybody all over your agency, all over your teams, and put it to work. It's going to really help you as you're doing that editing process in your production. And the second is the greatest thing that was ever published in the Washington Post is a bureaucrat's recipe for chocolate chip cookies. If you can understand every bit of that recipe, you're going to end up with the most delicious cookies you ever tasted. And that's my free gift to you today. Who else has a question? Who has a hand up? I can only see myself. Laman, anybody?
Not yet, Wendy. We do have about a minute left. So if you do have any pressing questions, please be sure to email Wendy directly as well. But in the meantime, as we wait, we want to thank you so much, Wendy, and also for folks coming in. It means so much to us. We have such amazing words of gratitude for you right now. Just thank you for such an amazing presentation. And yeah, for folks who aren't able to access the check-in form, just please be sure to email or message me personally with your full name and email address, and I will confirm receipt. And I'll play some too.
Can I ask a quick question? I've had to do this on my phone because my government agency doesn't let me do anything but zoom.gov. So I cannot get to these attachments anywhere. Will they be posted on your website or?
Yes.
Go ahead, Lon.
Yes, absolutely. We'll be sure to share all of the resources that Wendy graciously sent over today on.
Good, because I badly want the chocolate chip cookie recipe.
You should.
Thank you so much.
You should. And also, please, everyone, if for some reason you can't access something, email me directly. I'm always happy to share. Absolutely. You can get in touch with me anytime. Many times students will email me years later and say, I remember you said XYZ in the class and it happened today. And they really need someone to talk to about it. So I'm always available for any student, anytime, no matter when we had a class, no matter if we know each other well. Sometimes I might not have enough time to get back to you right away, but I will always help. So, shoot me a line. Wendy Wagner-Smith at gmail.com is going to always be active. It will never go anywhere, even though I do have other addresses. That's the one where I will always be found.
All right, I think we are safe to end this workshop today. I'll play Watermelon Sugar as our outro music. Wendy.
Oh, guys, this is it. Here you go.
Wendy,
I want you to have a wonderful sunny afternoon. Thank you for being with me today. It's time to dance, everybody. Look at this work we've done.